Lobsters. I guess everybody in the world thinks of Maine when they think of lobsters and think of lobsters when they think of Maine. We take them as being a great luxury, cost us a lot, and very, very enjoyable. But we ought to go back a little bit and see where this lobstering business began. I wrote about it in a book I did a couple of years ago called Islands of Maine, where America really began. And let me look at that and refresh my memory and read you a few points about this lobstering business in Maine. First of all, lobsters were so cheap and so plentiful when Maine began that the people who were brought here as farm hands or as indentured servants under contract from England were fed lobsters half a dozen times a week or more. In fact, it got to be so bad that they insisted on rewriting their contracts that they wouldn't be fed lobsters more than 3 times a week. And farmers used to use lobsters to fertilize their fields. They just spread the lobsters and let them rot and grow corn underneath them. And it wasn't until about 1850 or so that anybody had an idea about selling lobsters. But the dealers didn't pay much for a lobster in those days. In the 1850s, they paid 2, sometimes just 3 cents a pound for lobsters. Not a pound, I'm sorry, per lobster. And the lobsters were very big as well as plentiful. You can hear stories on the islands today about lobsters which weighed 20 and 25 pounds. One giant creature of 43 pounds was caught at Friendship, Long Island. And then about 1880s, they started canning lobsters. Never hear of a canned lobster these days, but then it was a terrific business. And there were more than 100 plants up and down the coast canning lobsters, usually the shorts. And they employed a lot of women. Men received $7 to $10 a week working in a lobster canning plant, but the women got only $2 or $3 a week. And that sounds very small wages. But remember that teachers were paid even less. A woman teacher on the islands in those days, 100 years ago, got $1 a week. And boys worked in the lobster canning plants too, and they got 25 cents a day. And then the live lobsters, which weren't canned, were sold to what they call lobster smacks, and the trader would come in and fill up his boat and pay a few cents per lobster. But the trader had to do more than that. There was more than money to the exchange. There was a visit. The smack buyer brought news and gossip with him from other islands and from the mainland. A good buyer also brought the essential stone jugs containing rum or whiskey. Island lobstermen, he knew, could not pursue their hard trade, fueled only by spruce beer. The island men relied on the smack buyer to bring them a needed supply of stone jugs. And the buyer who arrived at an island with only cash soon learned that more was expected of him. No rum brought, no lobsters sold was the code on most islands. Now today, of course, lobsters are a big, big business. We've got 8,000 lobstermen, and they do about 20 million pounds of lobster a year, which translates into $50 or $60 million. But remember, it wasn't very long ago that lobsters were used for fertilizers on the fields, and the workers were being fed lobsters 7 or 8 times a week to the point they were sick to death of them and insisted in their contracts that they be fed lobsters only 3 times a week. Remember that next time you pick up the bill for your lobster.